Don't lose sight of the bigger picture with these divergences that are developing here in the weekly time frame. And again, we're coming up to this upper boundary of the channel here. Again, maybe we overthrow it. NASDAQ did in the weekly time frame. My target's 5750 to 6,000. So far has been 5871 this week with the peak this week on the S&P 500, and we're in the 5800 area at the moment in that target window. You can see the divergences right up to this trend line, right on the nose here. I've been talking about this. If we overthrow it or not, we'll see what happens. Do we close strong? Do we close weak? Do we break the 5-week winning streak? Do we get a 6-week winning streak and then begin to turn again? Talked about the guideline. Very similar to that. We can go a little bit longer. Divergences telling us the time is short. Would you? S&P is going to rally to new highs. NASDAQ goes up and fills a gap, but then I'm going to be looking for a top. These divergences form. They're now nearly done. Please support the channel with the link directly below that allows me to be able to provide you this information. If you like the chart, if you like the indicators, let me know that by supporting the channel. Take a moment to do that. I would really, really appreciate it. I need to hear from you in order to make it work. Let me know that you like the charts and indicators supporting the channel today. I thank you for your consideration for that. It was up 4.77% today, back above 20. Again, I told you the 50 has been hovering around the 18 area. As long as we're above 18, it's not that the 50 is at 18. Historically, when the VIX gets above the 18 to 20 area, that's when the volatility returns. We did get above the 50. The 50 remains above the 200. The bullish crosses is warning, hey, this rally not going to last, and those divergences are going to play out. People get extremely complacent. All of a sudden, boom, and then they get a wake-up call. Now, we're above the 50. As long as we're above the 50, bad things can happen on the S&P 500. RSI is holding above 50 here. So again, are we now about to see volatility return, a reversal, or do we buy just a little bit more time? Divergences develop in the most recent price action on the S&P 60-minute charts. Momentum does not shift to bearish immediately. Right now, momentum is still bullish. I'm showing you in this video. So just some things to be paying attention to. It is problematic that the VIX is remaining above the 50-period moving average with this rally as we're forming bearish divergences now on the daily charts. Now, the NASDAQ was attempting to continue advance after filling the gap yesterday. About 40 minutes or so, 45 minutes or so into the trading session, ASML released earnings ahead of schedule. It wasn't supposed to be until tomorrow morning. The company said that there was an early publication of its earnings due to a technical error, which published the earnings a part of its website. It was down as much as, I believe, 17%. When I looked at it, it was down 17. 15 here, it had dropped a little bit more. I think it closed right around 16%. Getting whacked and taking the semiconductors down with it. NVIDIA, conductor ETF, all that weighed on the NASDAQ. Now, we're going to get Taiwan Semiconductor before the market opens on Thursday, so we'll be watching that. Now, the stock dropped on weaker China sales and a 2025 downgrade. Remember, I told you, if the semiconductors end up turning down, which we're being told there's no possible way that could happen, if they tank, they're going to take NASDAQ down with it. We're watching NVIDIA so closely and the semiconductors. Here is the daily chart of ASML, and just getting whacked. It had the death cross, 50 dropping below the 200, but down at the lows at 17%. It ended down, 16.25% for the session. Taiwan Semiconductor, which will report before the market opens on Thursday, they were down 2.64%. Again, I'm looking at NVIDIA, I'm looking at NASDAQ, and the semiconductors for possible, like right here, for possible double tops. So again, NVIDIA has moved, made a slightly lower low, at least so far. It still may go a little bit higher. Here we went slightly higher. May not be done yet, but just pay attention to the semiconductors. Earnings take it through this area a little bit higher, or mark this as a turning point, possible diversions here. So again, we'll see what happens with Taiwan Semiconductor and semiconductors. Later in the week, we'll be watching that closely. Watching for the same possible pattern on NVIDIA, which again is a double top, which is the same thing I'm watching for on the NASDAQ. Again, I think we get this double top. Now, I told you I thought we'd set up a lower high, but I told you I thought we'd rally. The CEO started selling over here, finished over here in September, sold early, supposed to finish selling by March of 2025, ended up selling more earlier, and then said, okay, I'm done for a while. So we saw this rebound again. I predicted that we come up here above the trend line, above the August high. Told you again for a lower high for a double top, but I told you I could be wrong about that, and we could get a higher high. I'm looking for a double top here. We could be seeing that NASDAQ and again Taiwan Semiconductor. So again, we'll be watching semiconductors closely. We can still form a divergence right here, just under the peak here at 140.75. With yesterday's high, and then we turned down to fill the gap. So again, coming back to the 10 period, we'll be watching. We can recover on NVIDIA if we get a bounce with Taiwan Semiconductor later or not. Here into the heart of earnings season, that early announcement today from ASML, the financials turned up higher actually, but then ended up closing down. Some of the banks, the financials. We got the Taiwan Semiconductor earnings before the market opens on Thursday. We got after the bell, Netflix there on Thursday. We got more financials tomorrow. And I believe next week then we start seeing some Magnificent Seven stocks. Initially the banks and they rallied up, but then look at this. Goldman Sachs had rallied higher, gapping up at the open, and it reversed. It ended up down. Goldman Sachs. And again, the banks had some good earnings. Citi, it did the same thing. Possible double top here on Citi, but it went higher, gapped open up a higher at the open there, and then it turned down. But the semiconductor sell-off weighed on the NASDAQ, and it went back and it filled Monday's gap. We gapped higher on Monday. We went back and we filled that gap and tested the 10-period moving average today. More about that. But we were down 1.37% on NASDAQ today. We lost 279 points. So I'm watching to see, did we try to close above that upper Bollinger Band, or did we just tap it and reverse, as I've been talking about in each and every video? We did see the stochastic roll over today. About the NASDAQ in a couple minutes. Real fast. Again, I'm going to take time on this, but again, we've been talking about since the Fed cut, historically in 2007, 2001, the market rallied for 17 to 19 days. Out here in 2007, again, we rallied for 17 days. It triggered a top. We moved slightly higher, and then that was it. We started to reverse, and it marked a top, leading a topping process, and we ended up dropping very quickly, 20.5%. Ended up moving down 58%, entering in the bear market. That was 17 days. That was last Friday. 2000, we already had that top. We dropped 19.5%. We got the Fed cut. We rallied for 19 days, 19 sessions. Talked about 3.5 to 4 weeks or so, and this was almost 4 weeks, 19 days, and we just hit that amount. So again, we're using this as a guideline. Now, if you're hearing me say we're going to peak on session 19 at 10:10 in the morning, then you're not listening to what I'm saying. Guideline. We're seeing if we come in. I told you we could see it come in a similar manner, or again, it could go a little bit longer. It's a guideline. Today we hit the 19th day. Now, the Fed began to cut rates on September 18th. Again, I told you to be watching. If we get a similar amount of time, give or take, a little bit less, a little bit more, if we see a process develop on the S&P similar to 2007, because we have all these negative divergences in the weekly and the monthly time frame. Well, today is the 19th session. What I'm looking for is, do we try to peak out this week? Does it drag out a little bit longer? Does it drag out a few more days? Start a reversal now immediately. Today's selling pressure. So I'm looking for clues. Need more evidence than what we got today. As I said yesterday, there's still a very good chance that we form a divergence in the more recent price action on the 60-minute charts. I'll show you those charts. Having a little bit of fun. T minus 7, 6, 5, 4. Today was day one. This is what I'm referring to. having some fun with it. But again, we are looking for a topping process. Again, the rally that I predicted has happened. NASDAQ went up, filled the gap. S&P went to new all-time highs. Also predicting that the rally is going to fail based on the negative divergences that we're seeing in the larger time frames. And I talked about things that could cause the market to have those divergences play out. Earnings, tensions in the Middle East. I talked about crude oil possibly rattling markets if it went higher. If Israel responding to Iran were to target the oil facilities. Oil's selling off as the media in the U.S. is saying that nuclear sites and the oil facilities will not be targets, that it'll be military sites instead. Since the Washington Post broke that story, that the Biden administration was reassured that the nuclear sites and the oil facilities will not be targets. So something we're paying attention to today is we had the Selloff. We closed back below the upper Bollinger Band on the S&P 500. NASDAQ had tagged it yesterday, moved above it on an intraday basis, but failed to close above it. We're moving back to fill these, these gaps. NASDAQ did it earlier in the day. S&P did it later in the day. But again, no MACD rollover yet. We'll be watching. We did get the stochastic rolling over here. Stochastic still may turn back up. We'll be watching. Again, here we got, this push above the Bollinger Band. We turned back, and then we kind of drifted a little bit higher, testing that upper band a little bit. We'll see if we get something like that. It's a very similar thing over here. We'll see what happens. In both those cases, we drifted higher, and then we corrected sideways, drifted higher, and then we corrected. I don't know if it plays out that way. We hit the close below the lower band, closed back above it, and started the reversal. Never going back and testing that low. So again, we'll be watching to see how this unfolds here with the close below the upper band. Watching the MACD. Again, I'm looking for this divergence to complete this week in all likelihood. What I'll be watching is, do we sell off or rally with earnings? Tensions in the Middle East end up rattling the market. Not see that happen until the weekend after the market's closed, and maybe on into next week, markets get rattled with it a little bit. Just some things to be watching. The MACD is forming this divergence here. The stochastic did roll over today. That divergence is all over the place forming. Now just quickly, here's the RSI. Again, the RSI went a little bit higher than this previous peak. We'll be watching, does a divergence develop here? If we continue to sell off, the 10 period is right here, and this trend line excluding the shadow. I had a trend line right here, this black one right here. We overthrew that. Sometimes these rising wedges overthrow. But we also have another trend line from this peak and right here connecting with this level. And again, that would take us a little bit higher. And again, something similar to what we did over here with this divergence. We had a peak, turned down a little bit, and then we went a little bit higher, and we formed that divergence. Did we get something similar to that? Maybe. Again, the topping process is not done. If it is, if we've peaked, we need to see more evidence of that. But I do think these divergences are going to complete, but at the moment, I have one on the RSI. It did go a little bit higher. Your indicators have it. As I said, the MACD, the stochastic, the money flow, a lot of indicators are forming it. So again, we're forming this rising wedge. If we continue to sell off, again, the 10 period and the rising trend line come into play. We can rally after filling the gap here. Again, I'll be watching this trend line right here, just slightly higher, for divergences to possibly develop in the more recent price action on the 60-minute charts. Here's what's happened this week. We gapped higher on Monday. This was the 5-minute chart, and we went up, formed these larger divergences on some indicators, and we began to pull back a little bit here at first, and then we got that early release of the ASML earnings, and we saw the market sell off. Divergences developed, but they only gave us bounces here in the 5-minute time frame. So again, had this downward trend line. We did get this crossover. So again, do we continue to sell off towards the 10 period for a test, towards the trend line in the daily time frame, or do we try to rebound back above these levels? So just some things to be paying attention to in these shorter term time frames. Came back, we filled Monday's gap after breaking gap support, taking out the 200, and we got that death cross. For a bullish scenario, we got to get back above that 200 in the cloud. 50's got to get back above the 200. We get a bigger drop towards the 10 period moving average, the daily time frame, then we'll stay below that 200 here in the 5-minute time frame. That was the price action yesterday and today. I talked about on the 60-minute charts, these larger divergences setting up here. We got it the MACD anyways. But in the more recent price action, we could see a divergence here on the RSI in the 60-minute time frame. Been talking about this. You know, I told you, again, we had the triangle. We broke out with the Fed rally I've talked about. We back tested, we got the triangle, and we came up here, had a little tiny divergence on some of these intraday charts, and it could give you just a pullback and start a reversal. But I told you we very well could. And this is giving us a little sell-off to go back and fill Monday's gap so far. Could be that we end up forming a divergence, very similar to the peak over here back in July, the peak over here back in August. Again, we sold off in those cases, but then we went back and we went a little bit higher, sold off, went back, went a little bit higher, and then got bigger sell-offs. So again, could see something very similar to that here developing this week. I think there's a strong possibility that that happens. Try to immediately bounce, or if we drift down to the 50 period and the cloud towards the 200 in the daily and towards the 50 in the cloud here in the 60-minute time frame, still could bounce off of those levels and still get it. But we've come down here to the 50 level. Again, here we were just under it a little bit and then rebounded off that 50. Here we came down towards the 50, but then moved up and didn't quite reach the 50. So again, maybe we don't reach the 50. Maybe we come down to the 50. But still the possibility of that divergence here on the 60-minute chart here on the S&P 500. I said we overthrew this trend line, but if we go back here, again, let me just draw this on here. If we go back and we connect it from these lows and connect from this low here, and there were some topping tails there daily. So again, just connecting really this peak with this peak. Again, it could give us a level where we might reach if we form a divergence. And you can also see it here in the more recent price action on the MACD. So do keep that in mind here. Still might form this divergence in the more recent price action here on the 60-minute chart. Look at the 4-hour charts of futures with the E-mini futures of the S&P, which is right here. We're seeing the sell-off. We're seeing some weakness. NASDAQ looks identical. Looks very, very similar. Seeing Awesome Oscillator and MACD move to new highs. Could be we still get a divergence here later in the week. Our chart here, futures, almost equivalent to those 60-minute charts because they trade, the future contracts trade nearly around the clock. But a similar look to what we're seeing with that RSI on the 60-minute chart and the MACD there, S&P cash 60-minute chart. And NASDAQ has a very similar look, but it didn't move high, but I mean higher than the previous peak. It's got, again, a slightly lower high. This is a divergence that's now completing. Still may evolve into a triple divergence or go negative and then come back and form a triple divergence right here, something like that. So we'll be watching. We need more evidence. If a reversal is starting, we need to see more evidence of that. But I'm just watching these divergences on the 4-hour charts with futures and the 60-minute charts with the S&P and NASDAQ cash. And if we continue selling, S&P can test the 10 period. Also watching the daily time frame. Going to be looking for red bars on the Awesome Oscillator. Again, did we complete a divergence here? Oscillator, the MACD, the triangle that formed. We were going to go higher. We closed above the upper Bollinger Band. Is it going to terminate the rally, or are we going to drift a little bit higher like we did July top? Looking for clues. Not enough evidence that a top is in yet. I am watching these divergences. So above the 10 period, we may test it. We still have a bullish reversal of conditions here from momentum. Going to get a reversal. We got to see red show up here. We got to get a reversal of conditions. Last time we had it, again, we formed our triangle. We just went sideways. So watching to see if these divergences try to complete this week. Same thing on NASDAQ. Again, the stochastics rolling over. You've got your MACD forming this divergence, Awesome Oscillator. So again, do we see that begin to play out? Again, coming back, testing our 10-period moving average. We start to turn. Again, momentum's got to shift. We got to start seeing the cloud flip to red below the 10-period moving average like we did over here consistently. Bars, red cloud. We need to start seeing the reversal spill over into the weekly time frame. So looking for clues, coming back and filling Monday's gap. If the topping process is now done on NASDAQ, buy a little bit more time. Watching what happens with Taiwan Semiconductor later in the week, what happens with the rest of the earning, happens with in the Middle East. Do we see something this week or on into the weekend, or do we break that 5-week winning streak this week? A little bit more time and go on to next week. And that's why I talked about that guideline earlier in the video. NASDAQ daily chart here. Watching momentum here. Again, I told you we had that triangle developing on the S&P, a bull flag developing. NASDAQ, they both broke to the upside, and we saw the momentum shift briefly bearish, right back to bullish, as I've talked about a possible divergence developing with momentum and some of our indicators like the MACD awesome oscillator. Again, I'll be watching when does momentum shift. Now today with this bar, it's still green reflecting the trend, but we got some warning signs. This little X is saying, hey, possible shift in momentum coming. This little T right here saying possible top, short-term top. Again, these are just short-term momentum. Here we got it, and it gave us a sell-off for the short-term. Signals flip back to bullish. Momentum line, the arrow there. These signals are present at pullbacks. Again, looking at momentum here, similar signals, but led to a short-term, a bigger sell-off, I should say. A divergence back there as well, as I've mentioned. So again, looking at this to see if a divergence is about to complete here, and if it does, we start getting evidence of a reversal. Right now, momentum is still positive. Watching for a bearish reversal of conditions with momentum. I'll be watching for the momentum line here to begin to flip, but we are getting some warning signs that, hey, possibly momentum could beginning to wane. If you get these signals with momentum a little bit early and you go a little bit higher, we saw that with NASDAQ recently. It's a warning sign that, hey, pay attention. We had this gray shaded area, and I told you the pullback was likely forming that triangle, that we were going to get an upward resolution of the triangle at key support, and that gave us a warning there, and that was correct as well. Don't think the rally will last. I think, again, the divergences will complete, and we'll see the reversal, and it'll spill over into the weekly time frame. Now, I was thinking of that early warning signal we got with the T there with Bitcoin. That's what I'm thinking of. It came a little bit early and then turned down. But again, watching here, again, we've got the potential divergence here with momentum developing. Had the bull flag. Momentum went bearish briefly. It's now bullish. We'll be watching to see if it changes. So momentum at this point still bullish. We'll be watching to see if that changes. Or do we buy a little bit more time and again still go back up and try to test the highs? Again, if we are reversing right now, we need to see more evidence of that. We're not there yet. When we filled the gap yesterday on NASDAQ, I told you that was going to happen. Ever since we dropped back below a gap lower on the 17th, again, eventually we're going to go back and fill that gap, and S&P will eventually move to a new high. NASDAQ, I believe, will get a lower high. I could be wrong about that. If I am, we go back and we hit the trend lines I talked about in the monthly and the weekly time frame. We have gap filling, the testing of the 10. We'll see. Do we end up pushing above that upper band, or do we reverse off of it? Here we reversed off of it and corrected. Here we came towards it and corrected. Here we bounced off of it and rebounded. But again, you push through it. Here we started a reversal, pushed up through it, started a reversal. We'll be watching what happens here. Bigger drop, we got to take out the 10 period, stay below it. Here we dropped below it, but got back above it. Here we dropped below it, and we stayed consistently below it. Watch the 10 period moving average. Then we got divergences developing here. Maybe they're done, maybe they're not quite done yet. They are in place. I expect NASDAQ's going to get a lower high. Maybe it's not done yet, maybe it is. Looking for clues, but NASDAQ's testing the 10. The S&P is still above that 10, well above that 10. Do drop further. You got the 20 below here on NASDAQ. So again, we'll just be paying attention. We just fill the gap, and now it's done. We hang out at this area for a little bit longer. NASDAQ 60-minute chart, I talked about the divergence between this peak right here and here with the RSI, and on the MACD, this larger diversions, a gap higher yesterday, and then we came back, we filled the gap, and we're testing our 50 and our cloud. We dropped below the 50. So again, done. Saw the MACD roll over and complete a little divergence there. I talked about that yesterday, the possibility of that happening. We're buying a little bit more time and dwelling here. Well, we sold off. So again, now be watching this more recent price action, just like I said on the S&P. Yeah, we had a little lower high develop over here, and we do have a divergence between these two peaks, but we might see one develop in the most recent price action and go back up here and form a divergence. And again, something similar to what we had over here. moving just beyond the 50 period, just like I talked about with the RSI or the RSI on the S&P in the 60-minute time frame. And again, same thing over here. You came down to the 50 and bounced. In this case, you got a lower high. See a rebound back up and get a lower high or a divergence or something. We'll be watching. If we continue to drop, S&P can test the 10 period. NASDAQ can test the 20 period there in the daily time frame. Is this move right here, is this done? Still more work to be done. I'll be watching these RSIs, MACD. Does the MACD go negative and remain there, or does it try to firm up here at the center line? But it did roll over, all she wrote or not. But I need more evidence if that is the case. And again, we'll be watching earnings this week. We'll be watching Taiwan Semiconductor. We're watching NVIDIA. But it does with the earnings surrounding Taiwan Semiconductor and the NASDAQ. I said earlier, again, oil targets are off the table. Had they been on the table, that could have really just an immediate collapse in the stock market. Oil targets off the table, yeah, markets could still get rattled. Political issues can do that, give us knee-jerk reactions or whatever. But oil target's been, a target there. Say the oil facility's been a target. That would have been much worse for the market. So does that happen this week or beyond into next week or something? We'll see what happens. But I'm watching the RSIs here on these 60-minute charts. On the Dow is the S&P. Again, the divergence here on the MACD. It hasn't rolled over yet. So again, we'll be watching. Possible reversal bar here. We went up and we tagged this upper boundary I talked about yesterday. Again, you got this multiple point divergence here. Same thing on the S&P and NASDAQ. We did see the stochastics roll over. They can remain at extremes for an extended period of time, but again, we're looking at these MACD divergences and on the awesome oscillator as well in the daily time frame. But again, a rising wedge here on the Dow, bearish divergences in the daily time frame. Got again, just like the S&P, we got these little divergences going on in the 60-minute time frame. It may evolve into a bigger diversions. Watching these 60-minute charts closely, or do we get evidence that a reversal is now underway? Bearish engulfing here in the 60-minute time frame, right there at the open, going higher and then turning down, hitting that upper trend line there in the daily time frame on the Dow, right here. And again, almost bearish engulfing here, but again, we didn't take out the shadow. We did engulf the real body completely, but not the entire candlestick. We got these divergences, and again, look at here early on in the week. We got a topping tail. We'll see how we close the week out. Do we rally back up and then end up with the topping tail? And we got this potential rising wedge in the weekly time frame on the Dow. See the divergences here in the weekly time frame. We didn't get that divergence between the Dow and the transports. We did over here in the last peak right here. This one, they both moved to a new high above those levels. Did get a topping tail in the transports today, and we got a potential revert. The candle almost looks like what we got with the banks on some of the banks today, with like opening higher, closing lower. So no divergence between the two with this rally so far.